Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 28th of April of 2024. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the report of the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation. Today we have lots of very interesting details and updates, and according to the Russians, since the beginning of the special military operation, the Ukrainians have already lost more than 500,000 of soldiers. Most likely the Russians decided not to, let's say, announce these numbers today, because today is like Orthodox holiday, very important one. So that's why I believe the Russians will announce these numbers tomorrow or maybe on the 1st of May, let's say after the end of the month. But when talking about official numbers, today the Ukrainians, according to the numbers, lost more than 500,000, more precisely 500,815 soldiers. Significant number of losses, and most likely, and according to updates we received during the previous few days, according to the, let's say, military aid that Western countries are going to send Ukraine, most likely the losses are going to be higher, and most likely the losses sooner or later will bypass the number of 1 million soldiers. Now let's move to the situation on the ground. We have lots of very interesting updates from the northern Kupiansk direction, more precisely from the villages by the name of Kyslivka and Kyslivka. And once again, when talking about the report of Ministry of Defense, according to them, the group of Army West, as a result of clashes, managed to improve their positions, and during the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians lost 270 soldiers. Significant number of losses from the Ukrainian side. If you follow the Ministry of Defense report, you may notice that usually an average losses of the Ukrainians on that direction is varying from 20 till 50 soldiers, but not 270. And the big heavy level of losses, let's say huge level of losses, the armed forces of Ukraine was connected mainly with the Russian breakthrough in the area of Kyslivka and Kyslivka. As you can see, we have adjusted the map. Currently around 40% of the village is under complete Russian control. We have different statements of different mappers, and according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the entire most of the, let's say, 50% of Kyslivka is already under Russian control. And today, right before we start making the video, we got the first geolocated confirmation of Russian control over the territory. On this video we can see Kyslivka, we can see the railway station, we can see the buildings almost reduced to ruins, and we have one building with the Russian flag above. So this Russian flag confirms for 100% that this part of Kyslivka is under complete Russian control. Most likely during the next few days the Russians will continue their movements towards the western, let's say, outskirts of the village, and according to information we have, currently there is a very heavy clashes and very, let's say, heavy storm from the Russian side in this direction. The Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the situation, but most likely without a proper support, without proper weapon, western military help, the Ukrainians sooner or later will be forced to fall back towards the N26 road, and basically the Ukrainians probably will move even further to the west in direction of the villages like Pishane. And most likely during the next few days the Russians will be over-concentrated on this direction with the purpose to establish complete control not just over the village by the name of Kyslivka. The Russians most likely will try to establish control over the village by the name of Kyslivka. And most likely tomorrow we're going to start receiving first updates about the clashes in this village as well. Furthermore, some sources have already reported that the first Russian forces and troopers entered this village. For now, the sources aren't so reliable to believe them for 100%. And now we're moving further to the southern Kupiansk direction, and according to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to enter the village by the name of Makaivka. Yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation or, let's say, post from very reliable source whether it's true or not. But maybe this is true, maybe it was just like a media operation or special operation by the Russian, let's say, special forces, just to move the Ukrainian focus from Kyslivka, Kyslivka, from the primary direction to the secondary direction, Makaivka. But from the other side, maybe the Russians did enter the village, and if they entered, of course, during the next few days we would receive significant number of updates of Russian progress along Жеребец River to the south in direction of Terny, Yampolovka, and Siversk Donetsk River. Now we are moving to Siversk direction. We have lots of updates. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the main supply roads that goes from the town by the name of Siversk to Belarus Bilogorovka. The Russians have already established complete fire control over the main supply roads. Currently, the Russians still haven't managed to capture Bilogorovka. They made lots of attempts in the past to capture the town that located on the hill, but most of the Russian attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians in the past. Most likely, the Russians will make few more attempts in the future, but for now, the situation remains stable. Very interesting details we continue receiving from the village by the name of Sporne. Probably 10th or 20th day in a row, the Russians bombing the area heavily with different types of weapon, including the RBK 500, let's say, cluster rounds, and also the Russians continue clearing the edge positions of the armored forces of Ukraine with FPV drones. Once again, if we increase the numbers of days since the beginning of months, we're going to see significant Russian focus on the southern, let's say, part, on the southern strongholds, then in the central part, and the western part of the village itself, in the farms on the east. The Russians also were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian fortifications on the northern flank as well. Currently, we can't tell for sure when exactly the Russians are planning to start the ground operation, but according to geolocations, most likely the Russian ground operation in direction of Sporna is going to take place maybe even before the Victory Day and the May holidays. Now we are moving to Chasiv Yar direction, where the Russians continue pummeling and reducing till ruins the eastern block of Chasiv Yar. Currently, the Russians, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians haven't conducted any attempts to attack the stronghold. Most likely, the Russians are trying to improve their positions on the northern and the southern flank. The Ukrainians, to stabilize the situation in Chasiv Yar, have redeployed the special forces of the main, let's say, intelligence directorate, and most likely the Ukrainians will try to win some time, at least until the 9th of May. They will try to hold the eastern bloc until the end of the May holidays or something like this, but I'm not sure it will help them because the Russians are pushing. They continue pummeling and destroying the Ukrainian positions, but once again without any attempts to storm this area on the ground. Now we're moving further to, let's say, to Avdiivka direction, to be more precise, to Ocheretina and Novomykhailivka areas. The Russians continue improving their positions. The Russians continue the blooming of the flower, Ocheretina flower. The Russians are trying to move to the west along the railways. The Russians are trying to move to the northwest in direction of Novomykhailivka. The Russians are trying to improve their positions and to discover the Ukrainian, let's say, possibilities in the vicinity of Arkhangelsk. The Russians increased the pressure to the east in direction of Novomykhailivka and Keramik with the purpose to cut the main supply. Currently is not supply, but the main evacuation road that goes from Novomykhailivka to the north in direction of Arkhangelsk, but for now without any results. And of course, the Russians are pushing towards Novomykhailivka and Keramik itself. Yesterday we got the first updates that the Russians have established Novomykhailivka, Keramik, but for now we still haven't received any reports from the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation which confirm this information. Most likely there are still very heavy clashes. There are still some Ukrainians who are trying to run away from the encirclement because we see that the situation reminds us the almost complete encirclement of the area. Furthermore, the sources reported that the Russians managed to encircle a group of Ukrainian special forces in Keramik itself, the White Wolves of Ukraine, of the Special Forces of Ukraine, and those White Wolves were destroyed in the high-rise area of Keramik. Furthermore, the sources reported that Ukrainians start abandoning their positions in Novomykhailivka, and currently the Ukrainians are doing just one thing. They try to avoid the encirclement and to avoid a cauldron, and most likely they will be able to do this because the Russians are not pushing so fast, so hard, and the Ukrainians still have time, still have some corridor for these purposes. Now we are moving to Solovyovo, Bakhmutovka, Ocheretina, the southern flank, Berdichi, the southern flank of Ocheretina. As you can see, we have some icons, and according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Russians established complete control over Novomykhailivka. This information was confirmed by the Ministry of Defense, which is very important. For now, we still haven't received any, let's say, information, any confirmation about Solovyovo, Ocheretina, Berdichi itself, so most likely during the next few days, we're going to receive some updates, but for now we have nothing. Furthermore, the pro-Ukraine mappers continue, let's say, updating their maps, showing the additional Russian progress in the fields. So this gray zone, this white area is under complete Russian control according to pro-Ukrainian mappers. For now, from this area we still haven't received any geolocation confirming this. Furthermore, we got updates that Ukrainians still presence there, and let's say most of the videos from these fields dated, let's say, a few days ago, and most of them about evacuation evacuation process of armored forces of Ukraine. Some Bradleys, some, let's say, armored personnel carriers are coming to the fields, taking another batch of Ukrainian forces, and then the Ukrainians are heading further to the west, to the southwest, in direction of Novomykhailivka Persha and Umanska, exactly in the area where the Russians are planning to establish additional artillery pocket. Now we are moving further to the south in direction of Netailove. Very interesting updates are coming from this area. We have three, let's say, geolocations. First geolocations show us how the Ukrainians tried to evacuate from Yasnobrodovka through Netailove, through the bridge or some road in this area, but another personnel carrier was damaged and destroyed by FPV drone, which confirms that the Russians have already established complete fire control over this area, and nothing from the north can bypass this area and to enter Netailove. When talking about Netailove today, the Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were bombing and attacking the Russian forces and Russian positions in the southeastern part of the village, which confirms the Russian control. If you remember the previous configuration of the map, you would notice that we colored the 30% of Netailove as the area under Russian control. Furthermore, some Ukrainian bloggers, some Ukrainian military experts reported that Netailove has been ended, so there is no more Netailove. Maybe there are some still Ukrainian positions inside, but it's just a matter of time when the Ukrainians will abandon their last positions. Of course, there are still a lot of job to do for the Russians. There is, let's say, the farms on the southern part of Netailove. There is, let's say, high-rise area in the central part of Netailove. So there are still a lot of job to do, but the pro-Ukraine bloggers probably meant that most likely it's just, once again, the matter of time when the Russians will bypass this area and the battle for Karlovka is going to start. Karlovka is under very heavy Russian fire. The Ukrainians tried to bring some additional reinforcements, some additional FPV drone operators, but everything is under complete Russian drones controls, and as soon as something arrives in the area, the Russians destroy it with artillery and accurate strikes. We still haven't received any updates about the situation in the fields between Nivoysk and Pervomayska, but so that's why we're keeping the area as is, but most likely during the next few days we're going to receive some updates. Krasnohorivka, the Russians continued their offensive operation, and after the Russians established control over the gas station during the previous 24 hours, the Russians tried to improve their positions, trying to bloom another flower, Krasnohorivka flower in this case, and now the Russians are trying to improve their positions further to the west, trying to bypass the Krasnohorovsky Vogneupорny plants, trying to get as close as possible and to semi-encircle the high-rise area on the east. So this is another flower, another Krasnohorovka flower, and the flower is blooming, and most likely during the next few days we're going to receive additional updates. We have lots of videos of how the Russians were bombing the western part and the central part of the stronghold, mainly in the area in the vicinity of the industrial zone, trying to reduce the Ukrainian possibilities of redeployment of forces, and the most important, trying to reduce the Ukraine evacuation possibilities, because of course the Russians during the previous days managed to achieve significant results. They capture lots of villages and towns, but the thing that the Russians still haven't managed to create, it's a cauldron. So of course the Russians want to create a cauldron. They want to encircle 2,000-3,000 of Ukrainian soldiers, to suggest them to surrender, to capture significant number of prisoners of war, to show very interesting and beautiful pictures in the media and so on, but for now they still haven't managed to do this. South Donetsk direction, we have another day of operational pause in Novomykhailivka, no movements to Konstantinovka. The same story we can see in Ogledar. If you remember, during the previous months we had significant number of updates of how the Russians were basically reducing this area till ruins, destroying Ukrainian positions, but today, on the 28th of April, we had nothing. So maybe it's just like operational pause. Maybe the Russians were trying to force the Ukrainians, thinking that the Russians are going to attack on this direction, or maybe currently we can see something like a silent before the storm. Maybe the Russians after or tomorrow on Monday will try to attack Ugledar and to start the final storm of this area. South Donetsk direction, Staromayorsk Urozhaina. As you can see, the territory is under very heavy fire, artillery fire, aviation fire. The Russians continue destroying and reducing till ruins the Ukrainian positions. Most likely they will continue offensive from the southern outskirts of Urozhaina to the north in direction of Staromayorsk and further to Makaivka and Blagodatnaya. The Russians will try to restore control over the positions they lost during the Ukrainian greatest counteroffensive. Robotyne area, we haven't received anything during the previous 24 hours. The situation is completely calm. Maybe the Russians and the Ukrainians decided not to do anything, or maybe this is also the small pause, small silence before the beginning of the greater storm. Kherson direction, we see continuous, let's say, attacks from the Ukrainian side with FPV drones. The Ukrainians are attacking the towns like Golaya Pristan, Kazachie, Lagery. The Ukrainians continue attacking Sofiivka, Lyubimovka, Kakhovka, Novokakhovka. If we increase the numbers of days since the beginning of the month, we see significant number of Ukrainian strikes in the area, which confirms that they do have some plans, starting just to force the Russians to think that they have some greatest plans, or they do have greatest plans and are planning to cross Dnipro River once again, and to force the Russians to send reinforcements from the main, let's say, line of combat contact on this direction. We have few strikes in the deep rear. For example, today the Russians published how the Russian reconnaissance drone was flying above Zaporozhye, a few, let's say 100 kilometers far from the line of combat contact. The Russians discovered another warehouse in this area, and as a result of Iskander strike, that warehouse was destroyed. Another important topic, another important note that I would like to discuss with you today is the Orthodox holiday. So maybe this is the reason why we haven't received significant number of updates. Most likely, once again, the towns like Очеретино, Novokhalinovo, Keramik, Kyslivka, Kotlarovka, and maybe even Chasiv Yar are about to fall, or the Russians are about to finish the clearing of some parts and so on. But due to the holidays, we haven't received a lot of updates. Tomorrow, I understand, going to be a lot of very interesting details. So let's wait for tomorrow when, let's say, war journalist will return to the line of combat contact and will provide us additional information. Furthermore, we got some reports from Crimea. The Ukrainians made, let's say, test attack on the peninsula. Most likely the Ukrainians will try to attack the Crimean bridge once again. They need some media victory to reduce the media pressure of losses and of their defeats on the line of combat contact. And furthermore, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours continue attacking the Russian the oil refineries and the Russian aircrafts with drones. The Russians started improving the defense of their oil refineries. On this video we can see a shield on the Russian oil depot, a fuel depot, some on the territory of Russian Federation. Currently they're trying to improve every single oil refinery in the area. Of course, this is very important. The Russians can't have problems with the fuel because due to the situation on the ground. We have lots of updates of the preparation to the 9th of May Victory Day. The Russians continue bringing additional tanks and vehicles to the capital of Russia. We have a trophy of Leopard, Abrams-based tanks, and so on. Furthermore, we have updates that the Russians are going to, during the next few days, to improve and to start more clashes, more attacks with missiles all over the entire territory of Ukraine. Also, they're going to do this during the, let's say, May holidays, because they need to suppress and pin the Ukrainians down and not to allow them to counterattack. So that's why the Russians will try to stay on the safe side, and they will attack the area of Ukraine, trying not to allow the Ukrainians to even raise their heads or something like this. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything from Kharkiv direction. Maybe there are some activity of the Russians and the Ukrainian side, but nothing from the line of combat contact. Just another, let's say, warehouse of the line of or concentration of Ukrainian forces were discovered by the Russian drone, and after that, as a result of artillery strike, as a result of Iskander strike, that territory, or as a result of FAB arrival, this area was heavily damaged and destroyed. So let's wait for the next week, which is going to be probably decisive and vital for both sides. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.